Hey everyone, Michael here for another episode of our Street Smart Ventures podcast. I'm laughing already. I won't keep a straight face because I have my very, very good friend and colleague, Ali Follett here. Ali, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So, as I see, the self-fulfilling prophecy, folks, I swear to you, I'm laughing already, but we're going to have an amazing time because Ali and I are going to really talk about looping in our core values and pillars of Street Smart Ventures, which is autonomy, opportunity, entrepreneurship, and life design. And Ali is someone who you really should know because she has done so many cool things as an amazing leader, advocate, just human being who has her hands in so many things and is just really in an amazing space in life right now. So again, Ali, thank you so, so much for being here yet again.
And thanks for the invitation, Michael. I'm glad to be here.
So, kind of like, and again, like Ali and I are very similar. This is actually gonna be a very off the cuff podcast. I've had other guests where I've actually planned a lot more, but Ali and I are just going to be super spontaneous on this recording. I think something a little bit different. We'll see how this works. I know it's going to be amazing, but Ali, I'd love to kind of ask you and hear from you that, kind of what has your experience been when you kind of think about life design? Like, I think so many, our listeners are going to be young people, advisors, program managers in the human services, employment, mental health field. And I think, and rightfully so, right? We're in a space where thankfully in our culture and priorities, we are hoping and striving for person centered and letting every person be in charge of their own life. And I know some people and places do better than others, but what does life design mean to you? And what does that look like both in your career and as a person individually?
Well, I love that whole idea of that life guidance and trying to figure out what your life is going to look like. I feel like so many times I was a planner, and I know that stems from my anxiety, other mental health issues, and also I talk a lot about my survival of trauma, and I feel like for me, having plans and having organization and structure and all these things can be helpful, but also hurtful for me because sometimes it boxes me in. It can activate old patterns and old thinking. So I've noticed a common theme in my life when things seem to really work out for me was when I followed my intuition. As basic as that may seem, it really does hold a lot of weight because time and time again, my heart has told me all along what to do, what not to do, what to say yes to, what to maybe dive in more of, what to lean into that may be uncomfortable. And so I found it that that always seemed to be the foundation of what I was planning in my life, whether that was business related, career related, family, individual, education, really anything. So many times my gut would scream. It would be that pull of like, this feels right. My heart would feel at ease when things would feel right and I'd be aligned at that. And then there'd be times where my gut would just be screaming, this is something's wrong here, or wait, or pause. And I've noticed any times I haven't listened to my gut since birth, there has been serious consequences. So even though I've learned from them, now I'm trying to learn how to trust my intuition more, which I feel like can be really challenging because how do we know that we know what's best, you know?
Mm. Yeah, and I think historically, right, I think we have um, many people who have been system involved or just like humans, right? We've all been kind of taught to like, don't always trust your intuition, like follow the
Mhm.
rules. And I almost feel like it's so counterintuitive to often like living your best life. And like we all have that power and privilege to like honor our own desires and go after what we want. But there's so much unlearning that should be taking place. And so, was there a moment, Ali? I'm just curious of like your intuition really paid off, like a concrete like moment that like comes to mind. And if there's a moment where like you're like, oh shoot, like that turned out like horrific, and maybe you have like a moment where you're like, see, learn from me, folks. Like, what's coming to mind for you?
I have a ton of those. So I'll start with the hard one of like, I thought it was right and everything else was telling me it was right, but my gut was like, this isn't a good idea right now. And I didn't listen to it. I thought, "No, that's just my inner critic," and that's really hard for me to differentiate between what's an intrusive thought or just low self-esteem or what have you compared to what is really truth. And for me, it was opening my business. I thought that that was going to be brilliant. So many people were telling me I need to do this. So many people were telling me you'll have this, you'll have that, and all these promises and all these expectations and support even. And my gut the whole time was like, this isn't a good idea. And I remember signing important paperwork. I remember opening business bank accounts. I remember doing things. And the whole time I was like, I don't know. But I thought that that was just kind of discouragement.
Mhm.
And there's definitely been times in my life where there has been discouragement, but my gut was like, no, 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 like this is
Mhm.
good. But I really, I had to kind of learn that. And um, I had successes, sure, but there were definitely parts where I learned this needs to pause or this needs to go a different direction, and, I didn't listen to it, and I paid some costs, some financial costs for sure, that's not fun, but I one thing I didn't lose though was my integrity and my drive, instead I'm just pivoting, and so that was definitely one of those moments of like I didn't listen to it. I didn't listen to my gut all the times that I had gotten close to being in trouble with the law, or times I'm in recovery from addiction. There were times throughout my addiction journey that was screaming, "Don't do it." Even the drug that I was my choice. I remember my gut was screaming, "Don't do this. Don't do this." And I thought that was just like the annoying person in my ear, like, "Oh," that parent kind of figure of like, "Don't do this." And I didn't listen and I had some heavy stuff from that. But on the flip side, there were times where I listened to my intuition despite everyone around me telling me a different story, and it was the best decision I made. And that was with my education. A lot of people told me when I went back to college, I had started college right out of high school and got kicked out due to my drug use and didn't return for many years. And when I was going back into school, I was probably only about a year. I don't wanna say only, but I was about a year in recovery, maybe a year and a half, and so many people said, "This is too early. How do you know you really wanna do this? Are you sure you're gonna be able to handle it? How are you gonna make the time for it?" And all these things, but I knew in my gut this was the right thing, and just one step was better than no step. So I just kept pushing, and then people started to see, "Oh, maybe she does have this kinda going," and that was I didn't have, like, a "told you so" moment, but I had, like, "Alright, yeah, this is working," and it's not all in my head, and, I ended up getting my associate's degree, and now I'm back enrolled for my bachelor's degree, so, that's exciting, but another big one that I definitely wanna share is, um, being a mom. I'm a new mom, and there were certain things that people were telling me not to do, whether it was a guidebook, social media, other parents, my parents, this parent, like, whoever it was, there were definitely people that were really supportive and on board with whatever decision I made, but there were also a lot of things, and I would say mostly, like, guidebooks and social media that would tell me the complete opposite and tell me what I was doing was wrong, and I felt in my gut, I was like, "No," like, I have been connected to this baby since the whole time. My body and soul has been connected to him forever since he was created, so I think I know a little bit, and I just kept trusting it and kept trusting it, and despite the exhaustion, despite moments where people were semi-right, I still knew, "Nope, let me stick to what I know," and I remember some of the best advice people had given me of being a new mom was, "Trust your intuition's gonna know," and, like, they kept saying, "A mother's intuition knows," and all these things, and I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and I'm so glad I listened to it because now he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do and did it because I created that security rather than the complete opposite, which I know would have happened had I listened to other people. So that's been huge for me, especially as a first time mom. I don't know what I'm doing. So, of course, I'm going to try to listen to others and take their advice. But my stepdad always said in life, you eat the chicken and spit out the bones, and like, so you take what you want and leave the rest. And that was really what I did to really keep me going in this whole new role of my life.
Wow. Yeah, I was like, I had that visual like image of like a nice juicy like chicken wing or like a little like tendy.
Yes.
When Allie and I bonded over McDonald's, this is like I'm going to tell
Oh,
you all
yeah.
tale from like 10 years ago when Allie and I met on the Turning Point CT project, collaborating, which is now Connecticut Support Group. So shout out to them. And like Allie, like side note too, Allie has the same birthday as like my brother, and so yeah, Allie and I have had a very like brother sister like friendship from like the first moment we're like in a meeting, we're like, oh, I like her. We're like instant texting about like when you text about McDonald's, like you on the VIP list. So that was the little like chicken based memory
Yeah.
that none of you asked for, but you're all happy you now heard that. Tangent over on that. But that being said, I do kind of want to loop back, Ali, because I think you really talked about so many incredible things. I think talking about right life design, intuition, you really shared how because again it's for all of you viewers listeners again as Ali's friend and colleague like I got to kind of be here on the sidelines watching you go through everything and so I think to kind of reflect back at you and what you said and to help kind of enhance everyone's learning and listening and just us all like getting the most from our time together Ali. I really appreciate what you said about trusting your intuition and really honoring your values and what you want, not what others want, not what others may say with the best of intentions. Because I remember when you were starting your business, and I don't think I ever told you this, but like I was obviously so happy and proud. But like I had a moment like inside where I'm like, oh, like, well, like and I had a hesitation because I wanted to start different projects. I never did. So like I was so happy because I'm like, that's so incredible, Ali. You like went beyond what I ever did to like go off on your own. And so isn't it interesting how like from the outside looking in, I'm like, oh, Allie's like killing it. She's like doing it, like loving it and really happy. And then like I'm having a moment now with you, like as we're recording this, I'm like, oh, like you weren't as fulfilled with the business end as
Mhm.
I thought. So isn't it interesting how, what we each perceive and view, we can
Mhm.
be totally, totally different.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that coming up as I share that bit with you?
Yeah, it just shows like you don't know what goes on behind closed doors. You don't know what really, how things really do work
Mm-hmm.
out, and it's also it wasn't like my intuition was saying don't ever do this. It was just like not quite this because it was behavioral health field, which I
Mm-hmm.
know, which I've been in and will continue to be in, but it was a very specific division of it, so it was limited in being able to be successful. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things for my business to have been successful is it wouldn't have been able to reach populations that I wanted to reach.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way I could accept insurance, and that's out of my realm. That was just state guidelines, things like that. So, I mean, if you didn't pay out of pocket, you weren't going to be able to receive any of my services. And I wasn't like I was charging an arm and a leg, but still quality for what I was offering. And then things just changed. And then I remember thinking, well, I don't have to do this like this.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I can work on other things that I know will work out, whether business works out or not. And that's going to a different division that can accept insurance, can give me specialties where I can give people very specific type of services that they may want and like things like that. So, you just don't know what goes on. And there's tons of successful people I see that I'm like, wow, life is chaos behind closed doors. And you certainly did carry it well. So you never know what's going on with people. And there's people that had the exact same business I did and that were thriving. And I love that. And I think for me it was like, not right now, not here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
especially now being where I'm at now, I'm kind of glad it did fall apart.
No, and again, thank you for being so honest and vulnerable and willing. Because as we're planning this, just
Mhm.
our listeners and viewers, Ali and I were planning this, and I think I wanted to be sure you were okay with sharing this. So again, I thank you so much for being so honest. I think this ties in beautifully, in that, I think we need to, you know, for Street Smart Ventures and empowering individuals and agencies with our programming and consulting and coaching. This is like real life, and we will be here for you as that. Part of just our own of life design of business is pivoting, and so I really appreciate you giving an actual like nuts and bolts of like you saw the good in the people you were helping and supporting, but you had to adjust for what was making you happy and the reality of, and it came to that point of not right now. And you have so many other great things. But I do want to ask you and kind of go back to, I'm a little, but I'm sure you told me this, Ali. We talk so often, but like hearing you share again how like some people were like putting doubt on you with going back to school. I found that kind of like as you were sharing that, like shocking, in that I feel like people would know better. And I guess could you share more about like what would ideal support have looked like for you? Because I'd love to kind of, as we have advisors and managers listening, as we have young adults who could maybe have some extra learning on self advocacy, like what would have really helped you as you were like trying something brand new and like, oh, like I'm already working, balancing a new endeavor with school. What would have been like the best case scenario instead of all like the doubt and like people like placing words over you that like, can you really do it, Ali? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what would have been like made that an incredible support experience.
Yeah, well, I can even tell you what was supportive in those moments. My mom was really supportive in how she just believed that I could. She just knew. She was like, "I know you can. I know you'll figure out a way." And just her just saying, "I know you can," it was great with the own fear that she probably had, you know? And so I would say when you're talking to someone, put your own stuff aside and instead ask them, "How can I support you with this? How can I be encouraging with this? Is there anything that you need that I may be able to help with?" There were simple things that could have been helped with more. "Hey, help me look up transportation assistance. Help me, you know, refresh how to write an essay in whatever format it wanted." That was all like new, somewhat new to me and also refreshers for me. So I was like, "Oh God, how am I going to figure this out?" And I had my boss at the time, she was so supportive and I think that empowered me because she found ways where she can support me in my job role that can allow me to also succeed in education. And it wasn't for a personal company gain. It was
Yeah.
for just genuinely wanting to see me be well in life. And she didn't let like my record or, things that I had just climbed out of. She said, "Forget that, focus on that." So people that were really trying to get me to focus in today and look at my past as messy as it was, as chaotic as it was, how irresponsible it was, people really shifted my perspective. They said, "You
Mhm.
used to fight so hard for that. How can you do that for this in your life?" I had some clinicians that would give me, some reality, but it wasn't this discouraging reality. It was like,
Mhm.
okay, finances might be an issue, so let's figure out what aid there might be available for you.
Mhm.
Even if it was just sending me to a website, at least you were giving me something. I think a lot
Mhm.
of times case managers, directors, all these different types of roles, they get very focused on how can I just completely change this person's life in one encounter when sometimes it's
Mhm.
just that small bit of how can I help you today right now with this goal and kind of dissecting that. Sometimes even just
Mhm.
writing it all down for that person or putting it in a visual like form can help people. I think there's a ton of ways that people can support someone and express concerns if they really have them, but not in a barrier kind of way, more of a like how are we gonna a maze kind of way. How are we gonna navigate through this? And if we get some dead ends, how do we turn around and find the right path?
Yeah. No, as you were talking, I'm like, ooh, just so y'all know, Allie is like queen of vision boards. I'm like, that's right. She's talking about visioning
I have
and
one behind me.
imagining and like, yeah. So, and you really talked about, Allie, how, in contrast to those limiting, and doubtful experiences you had with certain moments in your life, you've really shared some great experiences where people have been supportive but empowered your own autonomy. And like at the end of the day, it's on you. You're in charge to do what you want. But how you said it so beautifully. This is going to be like the highlight clip where maybe our talk is how can I help you right now, not having to make everything perfect. And I think that it can sound and work great in a movie, like, oh, the fairy godmother approach, like one wand and it's all like different, but that's not how reality is. So I appreciate you kind of like shedding a light on that.
Yeah.
So I actually, you brought something up that I know we talked about beforehand, but I think part of what I'd love to kind of talk to you about is kind of your own experience with, your incarceration and what that looks like. And I think, in planning this, we've had some conversations with some advisors in our programs who really want to do better and learn better, and how can they support young people who may have been system involved in any capacity. And so, is there anything you feel comfortable sharing for with our time together today?
Yeah, I would say when you're helping someone transition into the community from a place that may have been toxic, hurtful, whatever it may be, um, really empower them with giving them their choice, their feeling of choice back. A lot of times I see a theme in a lot of things like incarceration, even rehabilitation facilities, abusive relationships, things like that. People feel as if they lose their choice of what they do. Even basic things like, "What am I gonna eat today?" And I understand that sometimes in some areas you may not have choices as simple like that, but what can you give them? I always try to find, a lot of times we can't do this, we can't do that, I can't do this and I can't do that. What can we do? What can we figure out? There's always creative ways, and I think a lot of times, especially people that are working in a helping role, that person that you're helping probably has a really good idea. It's just how are we gonna make it work? A lot of the
Mm.
best ideas that I've had when working in programs has been from the recipients themselves. So, things I never would have thought of. So a lot of times I always say just like work with that person, see what they have. And when you have people with a past that can cause them barriers like incarceration with a record, a felon. I had 6 felonies on my record when I was released from prison, and the jobs that people will post or say, like Goodwill hires or Wendy's hires or felons, and like they have this blanket list of agencies that hire, and I'll tell you, I went to all those places, and what they don't tell you in the fine print is that when it comes to this applicant or that applicant, a lot of times they're gonna go for the one without the record, and a lot of times your charges can matter with where you get placed at the place. For example, there was a very popular rest grocery store, and that had many different levels of positions that were open, and I applied to a few of them, and I didn't get any of the main ones that I applied for because I had one specific charge that made them like, "Nope, we don't want her anywhere near this stuff," and or this role or whatever, and then other roles would have been fine. So a lot of times people have, just handing someone a sheet of places that are hiring and quote hire felons or people with records, there's always fine print there. And I think Connecticut made a stride years ago with the ban the box, where people don't have to check that box anymore saying I have a record when initially applying, but the background check still comes up. It's good that you at least didn't get put out of that pile. However, what's the next conversation? Do employers or agencies just see that and then, okay, never mind? Or do they take the time to interview that person? Do they take the time to sit and find out what their story was behind that? I found that for people who may have a checkered past like myself and may have those barriers, There's moments where you can really surprise people when you, especially employers or future potential employers, is when you kind of are very honest about it. And when you talk about how you learned from it and how you write your resume, because even with a past that could have some harmful things or things you're not proud of, there's still a story behind it. There was still a lesson, and there's ways you can talk about your instance without having it come off as, you're just whatever they think you are, that you're part of that stigma and you're part of that label. You can say things like, "Yeah, I used substances for a long time and it destroyed my life and it led me to places I never imagined. And here, this is what I'm doing now to change it. This is what I've learned from it. I've learned resiliency. I've learned survival. I've learned hope, things like that. And I think when you're honest, it can help for sure. Gives people perspective. It humanizes things a little more. And when you're working with people, you really got to keep that in mind, that telling people to just go out and apply somewhere doesn't always work. What about transportation? What about, are they gonna be able to afford their work uniform? Are they going to be able to have access to Wi-Fi if it's a remote job? There's so many other things that may be in the way that you may be able to help with, or you may be in that scenario and be struggling with those things and thinking, "Yeah, they want me, yeah, I got a job an hour away, but I don't have any transportation there. That wouldn't be realistic." So there might be other ways that someone that's helping them may be able to help with that, or find something else that works for them. Things like that I feel like can go a really long way.
Hmm. And I smiled, especially in one part, because you brought up and already answered what I was going to ask you was, what was a lesson or something you learned from everything you went through? And you talked about hope, resilience, strength. I think you, out of anyone I know, Allie, is someone that um, just you embody the power of storytelling and reinvention, and just you're someone who just has a joy and light about you, that you are like the alchemist, like the metal and the gold, like you're like Ali the alchemist, like that's a new business maybe one day. You're just like systems change, like no, just I'm just rambling there for a moment, but I think, in all seriousness, I think um I just again respect and validate just your vulnerability and honesty. I think you again talked about everything from, if you are someone who's supporting someone, you talked about psychological safety and talking about like disclosure. You talked about also the nuts and bolts practical, like what to actually put on a resume, what resources are in place. So you really are highlighting, we all need to kind of keep that in mind, right? If you are as someone who is supporting someone, it's not just here's a list, like have at it,
Yeah.
like a checkbox. Like we're human. We need it's having those honest conversations. How can I help you right now? And just asking and just being there. And I think you and I have talked a lot about just that consistency. And I think that we've both had a lot of conversations where I know in my own life, right, I think what I appreciated most was not having things fixed for me, but just knowing like who a safe person was. They didn't have to
Mhm.
do diddly for me, but if I knew, like I could go up to you if you were like, when I was hospitalized, oh, I knew like right off the bat, like
Mhm.
there could be a whole room full of people who were observing me, but I knew out of like that whole room, I'd go up to like
Mhm.
only one or two people who I knew I could ask a question or at least feel okay. And so just sometimes and that's kind of getting the whole point, right? I think we going back to your what's the magic word today, Allie? Intuition, right? Everyone is so intuitive in their own way, and there's so much that goes unsaid. And I think you've in everything you've shared really highlighted that it's honoring your own intuition, but it's also understanding that everything you do makes a difference for better or for worse. So it's I don't say that as like a judgmenty thing that I'm like watching you. I'm not Santa Claus or anything, but it's just like, but it's the fact that people can tell if you believe in them. People can tell if you're thinking negatively about them. There's so much that goes unspoken, human to human. And I don't know, I'm rambling, Allie, but any thoughts? I'll stop there that you want to follow up with.
Well, no, I like what you said because at the end of the day, someone like like the quote says, people don't remember what you told them that they remember how you made them feel. And a lot of times, especially if you're in a role where you're helping others, it can be challenging if you don't have the way of fixing or making it better because the systems is bad or whatever it may be. It's out of your control. It's not you. It can be really disheartening, and especially when someone's coming to you for help and they're giving you that trust and they're being vulnerable, and then you're like, oh, I have no idea what to do with that. Sometimes just a simple validation of thank you so much for sharing that with me. I'm going to look into it or whatever. And even if it's something you can't necessarily look into, you can find ways to be that cheerleader of that person where when they do get something exciting happening, they're going to share it with you because just your excitement, just your encouragement, your facial expressions, like me being a mom right now with my baby, I can see how my face expressions change everything. It doesn't matter I could be saying some terrible things to him, but if I say it in a voice like this with a ton of smiles, he's going to think I'm saying the greatest thing ever. And that happens in adulthood and young adulthood. You can tell when someone's like, you can die. And where it's not real. And so sometimes though, if you just get to hold that space of truly celebrating someone, truly saying, hey, I noticed that you passed that test, or check in on things. If someone says things to you, I feel like especially if you work with young people, they are always giving you nuggets of information about their life, their interests, things like that. Even the closed off ones, like they are still creative in their own ways. And you can find ways to be like, hey, I noticed you did this, this, and this. It's so nice to see that. How does that feel for you right now? Look at you go, just being that person to celebrate. I still have one of my clinicians from 10 years ago that is still working at the same agency, and I'll pop in sometimes and ask to talk to her, and I'll be like, you won't believe this. This happened. And it wasn't because she gave me the answers of how to solve my life problems and she was my therapist. It was because she held space for my emotions, challenged me in the things that I needed to, empowered me in areas that I can, showed me caution and safety, helped me build safety nets for areas where she was like, I don't know about that. So yeah, those are all things that people can do for one another, whether you're in that helping role or not. Even if it's just friend to friend, you can be that safety net if they really do go out and do everything that you're like, don't do it. And then if they fall, that you're there to help them and encourage them and not kick them when they're down or say, I told you so. That's for sure.
I love that. No, and I think, if I had to pick a few words to describe you, Allie, like you are a connector, you are a cheerleader, you are a collaborator, you are a creator. All C words. I'll try to maybe if you ask me later on, I'll throw out some other ones. But I just think you really embody everything we're about at Street Smart Ventures in just helping people build the lives they're meant to and want to live. And I'm just wondering, I think we've been talking for a little over half an hour now. Is there anything else on your mind or that you want to share with our young adult listeners or maybe any other professionals maybe listening?
Again, that listen to your gut, listen to your intuition, your heart, your heart really does know. And as hard as it can be to navigate that and listen to that, it's a brave thing to listen to that. Do it and test it out. Do it with safety, even if you aren't fully sure of what you're about to do. And just know that mistakes can happen and you can learn from them. And even if it's something that you're like, yeah, all about, there can be setbacks, and that's okay. And you got to learn from that. And it's not always going to be like this. So many times people would tell me that and be like, but it is right now. And looking back now, I can see ways that had helped because it had brought me out of that moment and brought me out of that kind of tornado of constantly going and spinning and not knowing where I'm going to land or if I'm even going to be okay when I land. So, There's damage control for sure. And just, continue to follow what goes. If your gut is telling you that this is what you gotta do, the only way you're gonna know if you should have done it is if you do it. I'm glad that I attempted to start and did start and did my business for a while, and but even though it failed, I'm glad that I tried, because what if I didn't? Then 10 years
Mhm.
from now, I'm gonna wonder, "What if I started this earlier?" Or, "What if I did this? I bet you I'd be here by now." And you don't know that. So, I'm glad that I did, because if I didn't, I would have never known. And I think that that's some of the best advice I've ever been given of what to do with life decisions, is if you don't try, you won't ever know. So, try. You never know. It could work out.
Yeah. And on that note, listen, y'all know from my intro with Allie, I could talk to Allie for hours and hours and hours. She has got a very full life. So I think on that note, you ended it so splendidly. I think this is a beautiful segue into kind of pausing our time with Allie for now. I think, Allie, if our viewers want to connect with you or find you, how can they do that?
Ooh. Um We can give them my email, or I don't know, they can just stalk me on social media. Let's do that. I'd rather
Okay,
grow that,
we'll go with
'cause then
social
you
media.
get
All right.
an insight of my life as I start to be bored and post things more. You can
And you're actually the first one I've thought to like ask that because like other people have like
Why
already in
not?
their
It's public,
marketing.
like, the whole point is to grow it, right? Help me pay for my kid, like, follow me.
Well, Allie is definitely someone you want to know, and I am so blessed and honored to know you, to be your friend, Allie. So again, thank you so much for sharing just a little bit about who you are, your life, your story, your experiences. And on that note, thanks everyone, and until next time, take care.
Thanks, Michael.